Today, I get to talk about an exciting new game coming from Minion Games called the Manhattan Project Energy Empire. Now, this is kind of a spiritual successor to the Manhattan Project, which is actually one of the first reviews I wrote for Gaming Trend. Both in theme, in that it takes place right after World War II, with countries rebuilding their infrastructure and resources after the war, and then also in mechanics, in that it uses kind of a similar feel of placing workers and then removing workers that Manhattan Project utilized pretty amazingly. So first we're going to go through and talk about some of the rules and some of the components of the game, and then move into what I think about the game and my general recommendation. Now, before we get into the actual components, I want to point out that this is a prototype, a pre-production copy. This is not what you will be getting if you were to go to your friendly local game store or buy this online. This is going to have a little bit different components, but if anything, if the retail copy is anything like this one, you're going to be well surprised. There's some awesome components even in this prototype. Energy Empire is all about different countries rebuilding themselves after World War II. And so each player plays as one of these countries. In this case, I have the US set up down here at the bottom. Now, each player gets their own player board representing both the environment of their country as well as the workers and energy, along with the resources that the country has. So at the start of the game, you start with very little, and then slowly over the game you build up, particularly building up these structures, which you buy in each of the 3 different markets. Now, there's lots of different ways that the countries will be scored. One of them will be on their environment, so the more pollution that is in the environment, the less a country will score. A country will also score points at the end of the game dependent on their standing at the United Nations. The higher you are, the more respected you are, the more points you get. Additionally, countries will be scored based on the number of energy dice they have, which is roughly equal to their energy production capability. And countries will be scored based on their achievements that they're able to achieve throughout the game. Achievements range from things such as trying to get a certain number of resources to having a certain number of different types of the structure cards, and they just allow for a piece of hidden scoring information by the end of the game. On a player's turn, they will be doing one of 2 things. They will either be taking a work action or a generate action. These are similar to Manhattan Project, where you would take either playing turns or you would take recalling turns. So in Energy Empire, when a player takes a work action, they're going to take one of their workers and put them out on the board in one of the various locations to perform some type of action or ability. Now, when they do that, they have to put out a number of tokens greater than the number that's already there. So for most of them that are open, you can just put down one worker. However, if you were to put down a worker onto a spot that has another worker, even one of your own workers, you need to put down energy plus workers so that it's greater than the number of tokens from any other player. And then this gives you access to that playing location. Now, once you play up here on the main board in one of the 3 areas, government, industry, or commerce, you then can play any number of workers that you want on your own structures that match that color. So in this case, playing on brown, you'd be able to play on your 2 brown structures. Structures give you additional ways to produce resources. Most of the time, they're very similar to the action spaces that are available on the board, but they allow you to do it as a free action in conjunction with playing up on the main board. The other type of turn a player can take is a generate turn. In a generate turn, you're going to be recalling your workers, so removing them off of the main board and your structures, and then resetting your energy and generating new energy. You do that by rolling these energy dice. The way the energy dice work are that each type will have a different capacity of generation, but then they'll also start introducing pollution to your environment, potentially. So managing this is going to be important in keeping your environment clean. As players progress through the game, they will be acquiring more and more structure cards. These will allow players to develop an engine to focus on a certain type of play style, either getting a certain number or type of resources, in particular those that can be used to influence the UN track, or pushing towards one of the achievements that a player may have. And so as they progress, they'll get more and more structures, they'll get more workers, they'll get different energy die, and as the play moves forward, more energy will be acquired by the individual players, which then allows them to take more and more complex actions. The game length is ultimately determined by these pollution stacks. Anytime a player takes pollution, either from rolling energy dice or taking a building, they're going to take one of these pollution from the first pollution stack and add it to their board in a particular way. As these pollution stacks fall, you will flip over a new global impact card. The first few global impact cards tend to be generally good for the players, whereas the last 3 global impact cards tend to be pretty negative for the players. And as play progresses, by the time the last column is depleted, that will trigger the end game. Everyone gets one more turn, and then final scores are tallied. Again, counting up the number of points in the environment, the number of points from energy dice, the number of points from achievements, the position on the UN track, and then any structures that a player has built. So there you go, that's how you play Energy Empire. And as you can see, it is a very similar feel to the Manhattan Project, with this some turns playing workers and other turns recalling workers. In this game, it's working and generating. And I definitely like the addition of energy, right? Energy Empire is all about this uncertainty around how much energy you're going to be able to make and how that will impact the environment of your board. There definitely is an interesting trade-off between using a lot of your energy to block your opponents as opposed to using your energy to activate a lot of your buildings. That's one of the main player interactions in the game, is blocking spaces. So there are definitely some interesting choices around that. And I think that's going to be where the really high-level strategic play is going to happen, is intentionally putting a lot of energy and workers on contentious action spots on the board. But that definitely does have a similar feel to the Manhattan Project, in that you're playing or recalling, and sometimes your only option is to play, and sometimes your only option is to recall. But it's those in-between turns when you could recall or you could play that make it pretty interesting. One of my main objections to Energy Empire, and this is a pretty big nitpick in the sense of you're still going to have a great experience if you're to play, you probably won't even notice this, is that the paths to victory seem to be pretty static. There's only one real way to win. It seems as though there's lots of different ways to get points, right? You can get points from the achievements, you can get points from having energy die, you can have points from the buildings you have. But for the most part, anyone who has won this game when I've been playing has won all of those things. They've had all the dice, they've had all their achievements, they've had a bunch of buildings, they've had all the way up on the UN track. And so it just seems to be very static, in that you can't win by just focusing on one of those things, which some people may see as a plus, some people may see it as a detriment. To couple with that, it seemed as though the best way to do that was an obvious play on playing on brown all the time. I went out of my way a few times to try the green and the yellow strategy, to try and focus on the economy or focus on the government. And especially the economy, it did not work very well. That brown track, because you're always playing there to get die for your energy pool, it's always going to be a better way to focus on brown and to monopolize on those buildings. That's my only big nitpick, and I only really noticed it because I played 3 days in a row, back to back to back. But it did seem like it was kind of fixed in terms of how you were supposed to play. But I really do enjoy this idea of where you play your worker constricts where you can play on the rest of your buildings. That was a big problem for some people in the Manhattan Project, is one person that was getting ahead would be able to continue doing very well because they had a lot of buildings. In Energy Empire, even if you have a lot of buildings, you don't necessarily get to use all of them based on where you play on the player board. So there is some strategy there in terms of, do you diversify and get a lot of different types of structures, or do you focus on one color and try and monopolize on that? I also really enjoy the way energy is used in the game. It definitely adds an uncertainty in that you don't exactly know how much energy you can count on turn to turn, but it does add some interesting choices in either blocking your opponents on contentious spaces or utilizing more of your structures every turn. It definitely is one of these type of engine building games where when you get to the end game, you're playing one guy on the main board and then all of your guys on all of your buildings at the end, and trying to get that synergy going between your different structures. As I noticed at the beginning, or noted at the beginning, the components in here are still prototype, but they're pretty top-notch in this prototype copy. Awesome realistic resources, awesome custom dice, awesome artwork. If you're a fan of the Manhattan Project style of artwork, this has definitely got that going on. It plays pretty well from 2 to 5 players. 5 players, you definitely get a lot more contention for the certain spaces. You end up spending a lot more time playing a lot more energy and workers into individual action spaces. But it's still an enjoyable game with 2 people. It is a pretty solitary feeling type game. There's not a ton of player interaction. So with 2 players, it was just as enjoyable. It does take about 1 to 2 hours, again, based on time. I found that pretty fair. So my overall recommendation is you're definitely going to enjoy this game if you like the Manhattan Project, certainly. And if you like kind of non-traditional worker placement games in the sense that it's worker placement with a little bit of a twist, this is definitely a good one to look into. Certainly a little bit harder to jump right into than the Manhattan Project, a few more mechanics rolling around, but that definitely makes it a little bit more interesting. So, if you're all interested, check out the Manhattan Project Energy Empire, coming soon, some point soon, to either a online retailer or a store near you. Thanks.